All right, in this video, we're going to determine whether a function given to us is even, odd, or neither. We're going to determine that algebraically. Our first function given to us is this. The way we're going to test this is we're going to replace the x with a negative x. I'll write my rules up here in the corner. If f of negative x is equal to the original f of x, that's the definition of an even function. And if f of negative x is equal to the opposite of the original function, that would be negative f of x. It's an odd function. So odd, opposite, and to go back to the last video, origin symmetry, all the O's go together. So f of negative x is equal to 4 times a negative times a negative times a negative is a negative. X times x times x is x to the third. So f of negative x is equal to a negative 4x to the third, which is not my original, but it is the exact opposite of my original, meaning that this function is odd. The next problem, f of x is equal to a negative 3x to the fourth minus x squared. So our f of negative x is going to be equal to a negative 3 times a negative x raised to the fourth power minus a negative x raised to the second power. F of negative x be a negative 3, and negative times a negative times a negative times a negative is a positive. So this is just going to be a positive x to the fourth. And a negative times a negative is going to be a positive, so that's going to be a positive x squared. That makes f of negative x equal to a negative 3x to the fourth minus x squared, which is my original, which makes this an even function. For the next problem, we have f of x is equal to a negative 3x squared minus 5. So when I replace x with a negative x, I get a negative 3 times the quantity negative x squared minus 5. And f of negative x is going to be a negative 3 times x squared minus 5, which is my original f of x, which makes this an even function. Next, we have f of x equal to 8x cubed plus 2. And f of negative x is equal to 8 times negative x raised to the third plus 2. That makes f of negative x equal to 8 times a negative x cubed plus 2. F of negative x is equal to a negative 8x cubed plus 2, which is not my original. So I'm going to try and factor out a negative 1. And that's not the exact opposite, so it's neither. F of x is equal to the cube root of x. So when I stick in a negative x, the cube root of negative x is going to be the cube root of negative 1 times the cube root of x. F of negative x is going to be a negative cube root of x, which is a negative f of x, which makes this an odd function. Let's try that with the square root function now. And f of negative x is equal to the square root of negative x. And I can't do anything with that negative inside the square root sign because I can't take the square root of negative 1. So I'm stuck that way. So that's not my original. And it's also not the exact opposite. So it's neither. Let's try something a little more interesting than that. Let's try a cube root of 7x squared plus 6. Replace x with negative x. We get cube root 7x squared plus 6, which is my original function. So this is an even function. Let's try 1 over x squared now. F of negative x is going to be 1 over a negative x squared, which is going to be 1 over x squared, which is my original, which makes that an even function. Now let's try f of x equal to x over x squared minus 4. So f of negative x is going to be a negative x over a negative x squared minus 4. Negative x over x squared minus 4. So I can pull that negative from the numerator out front to make this x over x squared minus 4. And that makes this a negative f of x, which makes this an odd function. F of x now is going to be a negative x to the third over 3x squared plus 6. So f of negative x will be equal to a negative times a negative x cubed over 3 times a negative x squared plus 6. So 3 negatives is a negative times a negative is a positive over 2 negatives is positive, and that, excuse me, this is to the third, and that differs by 1 sign. That's negative 1 times my original. So that makes that an odd function. Let's try one more. X equals 5x over the absolute value of x. So f of negative x equal to 5 times negative x over the absolute value of negative x. It's going to be a negative 5x over the absolute value of negative 1 times the absolute value of x. F of negative x will be a negative 5x over the absolute value of x. And that's exactly the opposite of my original function. So that makes this an odd function. That's all that we have for this video, and we'll see you next time.